My name is Jonathan Colby, and I'm here as a guest conductor for the production of Oklahoma here at Jacobs School of Music.
Jonathan, welcome. Welcome back to Bloomington.
Thank you.
Welcome to the Jacobs School of Music for your debut performance. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you work primarily, and your background in conducting musical theater.
So I was born and raised in the UK, and now I live here in the United States, in Massachusetts. And my primary job is serving as president and artistic director of the Worcester Youth Orchestras, which is about 500 students, serving about 60 communities in central Massachusetts. And there I conduct our top orchestra, our symphony, which is about 110. And it's our primary touring orchestra as well, so we tour overseas and around the country. I also conduct a regional orchestra called the Farmington Symphony, and then I do guest conducting like here at Jacobs School or for festivals and clinics. So it keeps me busy.
Yeah, and you conducted many years at a young artists program in Massachusetts.
I did,
as well.
yes. I'd say I started there when I was an undergraduate in the orchestra, a company called the College Light Opera Company based in Massachusetts. It's a training program for aspiring musicians, artists, technicians, people looking to go into administration in theater or the nonprofit world. And I went there purely by chance. They needed another violinist, and I went. And then I stayed there over the course of the next 15 plus years and worked my way up through the system, as it were. Very traditional in that sense. And became a chorus master, a coach, and then an assistant conductor, and then was made a music director.
So tell us what Oklahoma is about and what earlier work is it based on?
So Oklahoma, written in 1943, was based on a play by Lynn Riggs, which was written in the early 1930s, 31. And that was a straight play, and it focuses on a small town in the Oklahoma Territory called Claremont. And it's a young girl, Lori, and her love interest, Curly, and then the conflict that surrounds them in their community. And it was adapted by Rodgers and Hammerstein into a musical in 1943.
How does the score and the libretto depict early 20th century farm life?
The way it depicts life as it's seen through this lens, is you have this conflict of ranches, of cowmen versus farmers. And that's kind of the setting that they have. And it's a small community in a territory which to a 1943 American audience would be somewhat understandable because there were still territories. Certain states hadn't come about yet. Alaska and Hawaii, I think, are the ones that come to mind. So the idea of the Oklahoma Territory would have been relatable. Of course, what is not mentioned in this, or is overlooked, is that this also was what they would have called Indian country, but First Nations or Native Americans are not mentioned in this, and they are not really a part of the plot. So that is a glaring omission. But what it does focus on is this story between this love story and a triangle that develops around it, a love triangle.
I think because of some of those omissions, the work has been criticized for lack of authenticity, which in and of itself is a kind of problematic word anyway. But what is your opinion on authenticity versus someone's interpretation?
I think that there is justification in that criticism, but I think we also need to take a look that in 1943, this piece is very much a reflection of what is going on in the country as a whole, in that this is also escapism, that the United States and the Western democracies are engaged in World War II, and there is this desire to escape the traumas and toils and horrors of war. And by this point, the Allies are looking more and more likely they're going to win this thing. But Americans and you could say Europeans that were living freely at the time are looking for an escape, and theater and music is a part of that. Mm-hmm. So it does, I think, gloss over some of the perhaps cultural controversies that exist. Mm-hmm. But I think what it does do, what is authentic, is that it's Hammerstein's portrayal of human beings and their flaws, and how they are not perfect. Like Laurie, for example, She will not admit that she actually does indeed like and is in love with Curly, even when she is sort of pestered by her aunt Ella. And they live alone. There's no mention of what happened to her parents and why they're in this living situation, and what is it like for two women to be alone, in the Wild West or out west, farming together. And then you've got Curly, kind of this dashing, likable, somewhat innocent young man who's in love with her, who just wants to be with her, wants to start a family. And seeing that tension between Laurie and Curly. And then you add into it sort of the love triangle, which is Judd, which is Laurie and Ella's hired hand. And he's sort of this troubled soul. And over the course of the play, the theatre piece, you see how society makes him into a villain through no fault of his own. He himself is just looking for company. He's looking for love. He is misunderstood. He has a past which we're really not made aware of. And then how these characters interact. So they're very real. They have their flaws. They are not perfect. They make mistakes. They say the wrong things. So I think that is very genuine.
Of course. At the time of the creation of this musical, we're kind of at a turning point, not only for the great American Broadway musical, but also three important people. Richard Rodgers, of course, his about-to-be former collaborator, Lorenz Hart, and Oscar Hammerstein II. What are some of the interpersonal events that are happening there, and why are they significant?
Yes, so you had Rodgers and Hart, who had a very fruitful collaborative relationship, not without its troubles. And one of the things that Hart was struggling with was alcoholism, and this really was beginning to affect his work with Rodgers. And so they'd had some great hits like Babes in Arms and Pal Joey, but by the late 30s there was definitely a degree of tension between these two. And then you had Hammerstein, who had collaborated with many American composers like Rudolf Frimmel and Jerome Kern and Vincent Yeomans, great successes. I think his biggest one has to be Showboat. And you really can't have Oklahoma without Showboat. Showboat is kind of the great grandfather of American musical theater, and really set so many things in place that Oklahoma draws from, and they just take it a tiny bit further. But there had been some discussion of an adaptation of this play, of The Lilacs, which wasn't a success. And about 10 years later, one of the members of the Theatre Guild saw a revival at a summer stock or barn theatre, and the producers of that play at the time, they had inserted some more recognizable folk songs and hoedowns and square dances, and they thought, actually, there might be some mileage in this if we maybe adapted it. And so in the original scheme of things, there was this discussion that it might be the three of them working on it. And then by some accounts, Hart stepped away from this, and Rodgers had said to Hammerstein, if there's ever an opportunity, I really would like to work with you. And then it just one thing led to another, and Hart, I believe, left the country for a while in sort of a sabbatical, a break, perhaps.
Yeah.
And Rodgers and Hammerstein continued on together to write Oklahoma the Musical, which wasn't its original title. I think it was Away We Go or something like that.
And it really does set up the future for musical theater, which up until that point was greatly lighthearted, maybe silly, meant for entertainment. And this is a very serious take on American life at this point.
Yes, and up to then, yes, musical theatre in the United States had been lighthearted, definitely song and dance, sometimes completely separated from the book, the libretto itself. Sometimes it was just more of a pistache, what they thought were going to be hit numbers, just put them in. And the dances really had no relevance, but just to showcase, it was about spectacle. And so in Oklahoma, which I think once again draws from Showboat, is that you could have a more thought through where song and the libretto and are really integrated and really have a dramatic purpose. But what R&H do is that they take it one step further and they see dance as a vehicle to advance a plot line and have character development. Up until then, especially for a 1940s American audience, dance was the Ziegfeld Follies, it was maybe the Rockettes, it was something totally frivolous and spectacle or inspiring in a very different way. Didn't really advance the plot. For them, that was ballet, that was more a classical setting, you know. That was where dance could be serious in that sense. Of course, there had been some pieces that had more meaningful dance moments, but it really was seen by most people as being a spectacle, as a source of entertainment. And Oklahoma, no pun intended, rewrote the book on that.
The dream sequence, which does include the well-known ballet,
yes,
that's kind of a linchpin moment in the musical. Tell us a little bit about that scene.
Yes, so this comes at the end of Act One, and rather than sort of the traditional big Act One finale, very indicative of operetta and opera, big choral finish, big dramatic moment, Rodgers and Hammerstein end it with no singing at all, and it's 17 minutes of dance, opened by some singing, but then transitions. And so what we see is that Laurie falls asleep, and then we have the embodiment of her through dance. We have Dream, Laurie, and Curly, and then Judd appears, and she sees this love triangle play out and the conflict and what might be, and it's perhaps a premonition, and also just how society pressures them around this, and this conflict between the three of them comes to light. And the musical score reflects that and drives that storyline, as does the dance. You know, and for Agnes Mill here, this was her big, sort of not debut, but one of her big first significant choreographed events, and she sort of defined what this is. And the scoring to it, with Robert Russell Bennett's orchestration, really try and evoke the emotion, the plot line, the drama behind it. So the two really work together and go hand in hand. And then it closes with a big musical finish with Laurie waking up. And it can feel a little, not comical, but odd that it's this big dramatic ballet and symphonic score. And then Judd, the real Judd, wakes her up and says, it's time to go to the box social, the event. And then the orchestra plays it out. So they're still a little hesitant to go all the way. And at times the ballet, the transitions aren't as smooth as they could be, because I think the collaborators are still figuring out how do we really convey this. You know, as they go on, they get to Carousel and other works, they really begin to refine with Agnes de Mille what is a dream ballet. But it really was landmark. Who would ever close a musical theatre with no singing, and where dance is playing? Dance is the singing, it is the dramatic moment.
What do you think is so appealing about Richard Rodgers' songs to artists outside of the musical theater idiom? I'm thinking specifically about popular singers of the 40s, 50s, 60s, jazz musicians.
I think his melodies are so simple, not in a derogatory term, simple and eloquent and refined, that they really lend themselves to allow for some interpretation, but also as a basic material, you can trust them. And a big change for Rodgers in Oklahoma was up until then, when he'd been working with Hart, he'd always have to write the music first as a way to push and probe Hart to get to write lyrics. He often struggled, possibly due to his relationship with alcohol. And this was a reversal for him, in that Hammerstein actually wrote the lyrics first and had more freedom. That was a change for him. Jerome Kern had always insisted, well, I will write the music and then you figure out how to set the lyrics to them. And so in this case, the tables were turned. And so the musical lines in Oklahoma really are a reflection, a complement to the lyrics in a very new way for both collaborators. But I think Rodgers' enduring mastery of a lyrical line is very appealing and very flexible and adaptable. Also, its range sits very well within the human voice. It's not too low, it's not too high. You can change it by 1 or 2 keys and it will suit a soprano or a contralto, mezzo, baritone, and it will still sound authentic and it will still have the dynamic range that you want without pushing the human voice. So I think that also lends itself as why it's been so popular as a jazz standard afterwards.
How has it been working through some of the more sensitive themes that are throughout the show with these pre-professional singers and actors?
So on the first day of staging, Jacob Allen sat the cast down and talked through some of the themes in there. There is misogyny. There are representations of certain characters that are of that time that we would not write so much today. But I would say the cast has been very receptive and wanting to learn about it, and I think we've tried to treat them professionally about it and acknowledge it and discuss it, and like why is this in here, and why do we have to present it as it is, so we are authentic to the material, but understanding in a modern context some of these words are not appropriate, and when we do change them, it's because we want to make sure that we are congruent with our current outlook.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of Jacob, you've worked together a fair amount over the years. Is it kind of a more predictable creative relationship at this point, spontaneous, somewhere in the middle?
So I think that the last time we worked together was about 6 years ago. So it does feel like a reunion to some extent, but it's much like a marriage. and we have our little tips perhaps, but with great heart and love. But I think we are able to anticipate what each other would like. In staging, I really sometimes defer to Jacob so I can support him and what he's looking for. And especially adding in Jill, the choreographer. What does she need? Attending all the ballet rehearsals with her to see how she's working with the dancers and what they need, how to support them. Watching their feet, watching their breath to try and get the right tempo so that they feel comfortable. And one of the things I like about these collaborations is that it brings out a different aspects of me as a conductor. And I feel I learn and feed off of their energy in a different way. You problem solve in a different way as a conductor. But with Jacob, I think we work very well together and support each other.
It's marvelous to hear.
Yes.
Well, Jonathan Colby, thank you so much for joining us on Backstories and giving us a little behind-the-scenes look at this production of Oklahoma by Rodgers and Hammerstein at the Musical Arts Center.
Thank you.